Hey, Chuck Schembre here with Understanding Ag. I wanted to go over some simple sampling methods for our clients and for other folks who are interested in the thought process and the methodologies of sampling soil. Number one, it's fairly easy, so don't get overwhelmed about it. The most important part of the soil sampling is being consistent with the depth that you sample. So today we're gonna do a quick demonstration of sampling 0 to 6 inches. We sample the 0 to 6 inch depth because that is the universal agreed upon soil health monitoring depth, because that's our greatest depth of impact, where our management, chemicals, tractor passes, etc., and that's where the majority of the biology is living as well. And for the sake of being able to scale up in the cost of sampling, we tend to focus on a 0 to 6 inch depth. Now, if you want to go deeper and look at carbon, that's a whole other conversation. But for today, we're just talking about sampling for standard soil health monitoring. I've got this JMC simple core probe. You can buy them fairly cheap online. You pay for what you get. This is a $200 to $300 probe. It's very strong. This piece can come off, and there's other types of probe pieces that can be screwed on here. Anyways, this is not an advertisement for JMC, but if you're doing a lot of sampling, make sure you buy a real solid probe. I've got 2 buckets here, and the reason is that in an orchard, we always have different management in the tree row versus the middles or the alleyways. So in the sampling that I do and the analysis I do for our clients, I like to track the progress of the soil in the tree row versus in the middles. Every orchard's different. We're in an almond orchard today that has to terminate the covers in the middle for harvest, as most almond orchards need to do, or other nut crops that are dropping the nut to the ground. But in this particular orchard, an organically farmed orchard, there's no herbicide sprayed in the tree row. So we always have a lot of vegetation here. But in another type of, say, conventional orchard, you're going to have a lot of chemicals and herbicides that are sprayed here. So the soil health will be very different in the tree row versus the cover middles. So I always recommend to sample both independently. If you're just sampling across a pasture or vegetable crop, any kind of field, obviously you're just gonna do a broad sampling across the field. When I have my buckets, I always label them so I don't mess up, right? So this says TR for tree row, and I put CC over here for cover crop. That's simple. So I highly recommend you do that, because if you don't label your buckets, I guarantee you're going to pick one up, or you're going to forget, or if you're out in the field and you get a phone call, you never know what's going to happen. So make sure you do that. Okay, so before you even begin sampling your soils, it is, especially in an orchard, it's best to be putting a shovel to the ground and understanding what's going on with the soil aggregation. That will help you determine how you want to sample, how wide is the tree row sampling area going to be. And when we do the probe sampling for that we're sending off to lab, it is ideal time to be taking a shovel test analysis, so that you have pictures, photo monitoring. Every time you sample soil, photo monitor the field, the diversity, the bare ground, the conditions. And so obviously, we have variability in this orchard. And this will not be a demonstration of a shovel test. That's something you can find in another video. But, when I put a probe to the ground, I can't see all this beautiful soil aggregation that we have in here. So you definitely want to take a picture and note what's going on with the soil, and do yourself a full soil health in-field analysis along with the probe. So we're going to sample, I like to do roughly about a 2-acre-ish area. And we're just randomly walking around in the orchard. We're going to get 15 composite samples. So one of these, one core, is one composite sample. We need about 15 of these, depending on the size of your farm. A lot of people are sampling on 40-acre blocks. Again, you can determine, you can sample across 5 acres, 10 acres, and stick with the 15 composite. But again, always be as consistent. So whatever the plan is that you set up for sampling, write it down and continue those methods moving forward. Well, you really want to be sampling when the soil is moist. So we're in California right now. Best time is, you know, late winter, early spring. You want to make sure the soil temps are up to 50, 55 degrees. So let me do a quick example here of what I'm going through, what I'm thinking when I'm sampling. I want to be consistent. Determining the tree row area is based on what's terminated or sprayed, and generally, you know, and out here in this orchard, what I've been focusing on is somewhere around where this berm starts building up. Maybe, you know, we've got the drip line right here, so I'm kind of sampling around where the drip is falling. And, you know, it's a little bit of a subjective call, but as long as I'm consistent with sampling this way all the time, then you're fine. So you need to know your objectives when you're sampling and why you're sampling an area. So as I get to a location, I just do like a random sampling. I try not to be subjective, like, oh, that looks bare and this looks, you know, this looks better here because there's more vegetation. I'll just try to do a random selection where I'm gonna grab one from here, I'm gonna grab one from the middle, close to the tree, and somewhere out here. So what's important is when you go to pull this sample, you want to make sure you push some of the residues out of the way. Sometimes you need to kind of cut some vegetation out of the way, but you want to just brush those residues out of the way. You don't want the residues in the sample because they will spike organic matter. We're sampling the mineral portion of the soil more or less. And, you know, if there are some little bit of residues and organic matter on the top, that's fine, but we just don't want to get the leaf material in there. So I pulled this up. Some people like to mark off the 6-inch depth, but what I have found is most best is I carry a hori-hori around. It's got a 6-inch interval depth measurement there. You can use another kind of tool if you want, but I just measure. I put this along the probe soil column here, and I mark off where that 6 inches, and then make sure I double check tree row. Okay, we're good. Usually I like to just pop some of that soil out so it doesn't get in the bucket because I don't want that 7-inch in there. I mean, we need to be consistent. We're evaluating for carbon, biology, organic matter. You have to be consistent. If you're sampling an 8-inch depth versus a 4-inch depth or a 12-inch depth, you cannot compare. This is very critical. So remember, know why you're sampling. If you're doing a 0 to 12, focus on that. But if you're doing soil health sampling, you really need to go the 0 to 6-inch depth for monitoring for soil health. Okay. And then in the cover middles, you know, I'm roughly going to go from about here all the way to the other side. And of course, we've got maybe tractor row compaction. We've got things that look quite different. So again, as I get to a location, I'll do sort of a random transect. I forgot to mention, when I'm in a location in an orchard, I'll pull 2 samples. So I'll do one tree row on one side, one tree row on the other side. I'll be consistent. And then in the cover middles, I'll just pick some random locations. This isn't, you know, this is for monitoring and for using the data for making management decisions. So this is not for research. If you're doing research, you might be throwing out a transect and doing a lot more sampling density. Say we're sampling in an area like this with all the vegetation, you've got a couple options. You can cut it out, or you can just kind of push it out of the way and get yourself down to the mineral surface, soil, and kind of pick some stuff out of the way. It doesn't have to be anything, you know, too elaborate. Got myself down to the mineral soil surface here. And I'm going down. I like to, oh, I forgot to mention, I like to go down more than 6 inches because, again, that allows me to push this out, and you can only do that when the soil is nice and moist. If you're working with really heavy clay soil, that can also be challenging, so you might want to carry around a different tool to push it through. This is kind of a silty loam soil, so it's super easy to work with. Okay, cover crop middle, cover crop. Let's do the simple observations. I cannot tell you guys what it feels like when I've dropped soil into a bucket and just realized I put the tree row soil and the cover crop soil, and it's like the whole bucket needs to be thrown away and you need to start over again. Don't want to do that. Okay, in it goes. Okay, so if you don't have a probe, you can still sample legitimately. And so I'm going to show you how I do that with a shovel. And sometimes, I actually always recommend to have a shovel with you, because every now and then you might be in a really heavy clay soil or a real sandy soil that just falls apart. You're pulling up the probe, it's just sloughing off, and you're not getting an accurate sample. So always make sure you have a shovel with you. Here's how I like to go about it. I like to create a bit of a hole that's going to go at least 6 inches down. I pop that hole up, pop it off to the side, take a slice off the wall here, and this is where the hoary. Now, I haven't met a lot of people that carry one of these around sampling, but this has been my preference because I love this. It's so easy to slide it in. But I'm going to show you to get when you're sampling from the hole, it is ideal to have the same amount of soil being pulled from each composite core, so that you have the same rough volume of soil. That's why a probe is preferred. But if you don't have a probe, again, shovel, hoary, very cheap. You can cut off some stuff off the wall here so you don't get all that vegetation in there that could spike the organic matter. And then I get on the back side of the wall, roughly about 1 inch or so. I push down the wall till I get to that 6 inch. Okay, another reason why it's good to do this when soils are moist. And then I pull up roughly the same amount, and I kind of usually push off a bit of soil on each side so I have an equal amount of soil volume, and I'll shoot for this for each sample. So we're right at the 6 inch mark, so I've got a full 6 inch depth. So it is quite that simple, and you could do that technically with a shovel. If you marked it off the 6 inch, you could put the shovel down on the wall and do that, but it's a little bit more challenging. So do recommend having some other tool. Okay, I'm back at the truck with my buckets, and the bags are already pre-labeled. So these are going to Regen Ag Lab. You do not have to use one of these bags. You can use a Ziploc bag, but these are extremely convenient. And we're just going to fill the soil up to this fill line. It's very important, I believe, to pre-label the bags. And that way, when you get back, everything's nice and smooth. You just transfer the soil into the bag and then into the cooler. When filling the bag, you don't want to completely mix up and destroy the soil and pulverize it. You just want to give it a nice mix. We want to maintain that aggregate that's in there. Too much mixing around could potentially, volatilize nutrients or carbon dioxide. And the other thing is, as soon as we're done sampling, we got to get this back to the truck, and we're going to get it into a cooler on ice. No matter what time of the year is, that's what I do. So to keep the soils cool, and we're going to get them shipped out ASAP. They always say measure twice, cut once. I'm kind of need to measure 3 or 4 to 10 times kind of guy and cut once. So I got TR here and TR there, and I just pulled from that bucket so I can feel really good about it. I'm done. There's no questions to be asked. Because when you get samples back and you're unsure, it's not a good feeling. And lastly, I always put my sampling bag into a Ziploc bag when I put it in the cooler. That way, the wetness of the cooler doesn't smear or smudge the writing, and that way we preserve it and we have no problems with identifying the sample in the lab.